So good evening and welcome. My name is Sue-Ann Waugh. I'm the National Integrity Manager for Pony Club Australia. Massive thank you to everyone who is here tonight. I had quite a big engagement on this webinar, so I'm hoping that you actually find it as obviously as useful as you thought it was going to be, and that's why you're here. Just chat, we were just talking before, just chat in that chat space. So if we're going through and I mention anything and it sort of triggers something for you, or you want to ask a question, please do so, and I'll try and keep up. The QA space might be a good one for that one, or otherwise in the chat, I'm not fussed. I'll just try and keep a bit of an eye, and we'll try and talk to things as we go through. This session is recorded, so more than happy. We'll be sending this back out to club administrators, but I'll also send a copy to you directly to the emails that you provided for this webinar, in the registration process. So therefore, you know exactly that it's going to come to that email that you sent as well. More than happy if you also then take it back and show it to your committees if you think there's some interesting stuff in here, or that you actually think it was a worthwhile tool to come and have a look at. So I think that's it, because all of your mics and stuff are off, so they will remain off because it's in webinar function. So as I say, have a chat in the chat space if you need to, but we are going to move on and start this thing. So this is the Club Development webinar series. There are 6 in this series, and this is Governance 101. This is the program, and you'll notice that we're sitting here right now at the very beginning of it. So in the coming months, as I say, one a month, and there's a reason for that, so we'll talk about that in a moment. One a month to just help navigate a few of the management and governance issues that are around in your lives as an administrator of a club. So the session overview, it is big, but it's not really that big. I've just sort of listed all the bits and pieces that we'll cover. Game plan, good governance, leadership and culture, incorporation, the committee meetings, planning, finance, recording and reporting, communication, and training and induction. So there's a couple of different things we're going to touch on tonight. It will not cover everything there is to do with governance, but it will give hopefully just get your minds thinking a little bit around things that your club is doing or isn't doing, or things that you didn't even know you should be doing. So hopefully we'll get a few of all little bits and pieces in there tonight. The club development webinar series popped out of this game plan. Game plan is a free online management tool that has been put out by the Australian Sports Commission. There's been a couple of iterations of this that have led to this actual portal. It is there to try and help clubs develop themselves in governance, but also in management capacity, and it's free. So I did do a webinar of this during April, and so I will send that webinar link back to you as well, so that if you've missed that one, you can watch it and catch up on what this portal or this program is all about, and that maybe you might jump in there because it might help you to do a few of these things. This entire webinar series is based around picking up different elements of game plan. So one of the modules in game plan is governance. You'll notice here on the screen, after you answer some questions, and there's a little bit of setup to be done, but after you answer the questions, you can end up in a screen like this one that tells you that your current maturity rating as a club. And so at the moment I'm developed, but I can be excelling. That's my next maturity rating. And it will give me a few things that my club could do to get itself into an excelling space. And obviously once you're excelling, it'll be about maintaining that excellence. You can create action plans in here and all bits and pieces, but this is where we've launched it because it felt we could have a bit of a conversation about some of the things that you'll read and see in here, answer questions about, and just to help put a bit of a voice, I suppose, to the resourcing that's in here as well. So good governance. We hear a lot about good governance. What is good governance? It's lots and lots of things, but there's a few things that I've popped on this screen that I say are good governance. One of the major things that I talk about in terms of good governance is having a strategic vision, goals, and directions. So you know who you are as a club or a zone, your incorporated body, and then where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, and how you're going to measure how successful you were. that goes to the next point where we're monitoring our performance based on those plans we set in place, that we effectively manage finance and that we have good systems in place to manage other things. So I've put in brackets there, policy and procedure. That's what those things are about. That we manage risks, and we do that through assessing, planning and reviewing. So we put in strategies around our risks. We comply with legal and regulatory obligations from being a incorporated club, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight. We act in the best interests of our members, because as people on committees, we're going to talk about your responsibilities in that role, and one of them is to act in the best interests of the members, and that we look to attract people to being a part of our club, or to be in all sorts of ways. So in terms of membership, but also just being a part of who we are as a club as well. So there's plenty more, and I'm more than happy if you guys want to pop anything else that pops into your mind when you say good governance, because I might end up adding it to my list ultimately. But yeah, if you're sitting there thinking, I'd probably put that in as a good governance thing, go wild in the chat and just throw those things at me, and I'll have a good look at it later. I'm going to move into leadership and culture. And this is a little bit of a strange area in some ways to pop into, I suppose, depending on who you are. You may not have even thought about leadership and culture. But leadership and culture is an important part of governance and of your club and the role you're playing on a committee. This definition is from Kevin Cruz. He's a US leadership guru, if you wish. And I'll throw in that I worked with sports community for a little while, and this is a way that Steve Pallas at Sports Community has described leadership, and there's a little reason for it. So Kevin Cruz's definition is leadership is a process of social influence that maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. In terms of us and clubs, it kind of is a really nice round look at what leadership is. It's about us setting goals, getting people involved with the goals of our club, and we do that through social influence, which is communication. So what does leadership look like in your club? And I have to put /zone for all those people who are here from zones. I didn't mean to cut you out. I have pitched this at clubs, so we're going to pretend your club is a zone. Your zone is a club at this point. Leadership in your club looks like planning. It looks like communication. It's knowing the jobs that happen in your club. It's getting people involved. So getting people excited to come in and be in that space with you and helping you get the jobs of the club done. And that very last point I like to make, it's not doing all the work. If you're on the committee, it shouldn't be about you doing everything. It should be about you trying to work out how to get people to come in and help you. And so we will, over this webinar series, touch on those types of ideas as well. We probably won't do that tonight, but I want you to think about that one, because you'll probably find that often what does happen is the committees are working really, really hard, and we don't get people necessarily coming in to help us, and we're usually begging people for help. So we'll look at ideas around that one. We're going to talk in leadership around culture as well. And this Dr. Pippa Grange is a well-known sports psychologist, and she was a part of the Bluestone review that looked into why the Olympic swimming team who went to London in about 2002, 2012? 2012 sounds good. And they went over there and they just didn't perform the way they thought the team was going to perform. So they did a review into what had gone on. And this was a review into the culture of that team. We talk a lot about culture when we talk about sport. And what came back was that it was toxic. The culture was not conducive to people really getting their best out of the experience and out of themselves in that experience. The important part of this little conversation, if you wish, or this little description of culture by Dr. Pippa Grange that I want you to think about, is that culture is around beliefs and behaviours. It's what we just take on as being normal. So sometimes it can be something that's happening in a club and we don't even think about what's going on there. But that we can actually direct and shape our culture through strong leadership and sound methodologies. So I've just tied that back to leadership. In many ways, what I'm trying to say is that in good governance, your club or your committee within your club are the leaders, and they're the ones that actually can support the culture of your club. And in all sorts of ways, cultures can be all sorts of different things. Now we're going to move into, that's like a high level, have a bit of a think and let that swim in your brains for a little while. We're going to move into incorporation. And the reason we're going to spend a little bit of time in and around incorporation, because in many ways this is, the building blocks of governance. It's the actual mechanism for actually creating the committees and for creating the environment to govern. So what is incorporation? For anyone who's out there who's not aware, it is the process of making your club a legal person. So your club becomes a person, and it doesn't matter then if the people change on the committee, they're changing all the time, but the club remains the individual in that arrangement, if that makes sense. So it means that your club can then go into contracts, so you can borrow money, you can buy equipment, and it is the person. It also means that if you get sued for something, they sue the legal person, which is the club. So that's that protection. It's why you actually incorporate, because it does protect the individual members of the committee. So the people who come in and be a part of that management group, they're protected under the Incorporations Act. Now, this is not entirely, you're not in there and entirely safe. If you are trying to do something that is illegal or you work illegally in that space, the Incorporations Act won't protect you. You're out there. But if you're acting in good faith in that committee group and you're trying to run things as has been described by law or even under the association terms and conditions in many ways, you're protected in that space. So it's the actual club as a legal person that ends up being the individual that's sued or whatever else. And that's for the worst case scenario we've gone to, but it's kind of describing why we actually incorporate. It protects the individuals who sit on the committee from decisions that they make that end up poorly, that they didn't mean to make that way. So they didn't actively go out to do the wrong thing. Let's say that's their definition. Club constitution. Now, this is the absolute, when we become incorporated, we have a set of rules and we create our constitution, also known as rules of incorporation, also can be known as club rules. I am, for this entire webinar, going to call it club constitution because I think it's somewhere, it's an older terminology, but I think it's also clearer. So you will, as you incorporate, get these rules. So these are the rules of governance. These are the ones that tell you how lots of different things. And we're going to have a little bit of a pick through what your constitution will tell you. There's a few other things that will tell you, but these are kind of the main ones that I'm looking at. So the things that we're really going to have a little bit of a delve into will be about the purpose of your organization, who you are, who are the members, how they become members, your financial year, committee structures. So talking about how your committee gets there, voting, the powers of the committee, and how you wind up the organization. So that, in a nutshell, that's sort of what we're going to cover in the next couple of slides. I'm just checking there's nothing else in here. No, we're all silent. So important things to know about your club constitution. One of the most important things I will tell you, and in terms of governance, good governance, know where this document is. And if you know where it is, make sure it is actually the copy that's lodged with your Office of Fair Trading or Consumer Affairs. So whoever the body is that manages incorporated associations. Really important, because this is like your little Bible. It tells you exactly what your club should be doing in its fundamental governance space. So ensure in that knowing what it is and knowing where the constitution is and knowing that it's actually the constitution that you're legally lodged with that body. So whether, as I say, for Office of Fair Trading or Consumer Affairs, whichever way it's called for you, there might be another one in there, but they were the two that sprang to mind. But you'll know the body that actually manages your incorporated status or your incorporated bodies. Ensure you refer to this document. So it's really good practice to make sure that every committee member who comes on has a copy of it. So whether that's electronic and they can gain access to it or actually has a hard copy, really very important. And you've jumped ahead of me, Shari, and you can load it to Just Go as well. So there's a good little spot for documents to sit, and we'll cover that one a bit later, but that's okay, Shari, just jump ahead of me there. Make sure you... Megan, yes, if your constitution is old, and it's something I didn't actually mention, I'll jot that one down. good governance would say that you actually do stop and have a look at your constitution every so often. So even if you set and say we're going to do it every 3 or 4 years, if it is past the last legislation change and you should have changed it, you should be looking to update it. And that is just good governance. So that's a good question, and I'll note that one down. I'll note that one down, Megan, for next time. Put it on your website is another one that I often will say to people, so that it's easy for your members to get to it, as well as you don't lose it in general. Make sure you run your club to the constitution. Sometimes, because we don't know that it exists, because I've heard that over the last, I've been working with clubs for about 25 years. There's sometimes people don't know it exists, or sometimes they don't know where it is. So they're actually not running off their constitution. So it's really important, because what tends to happen is we start doing what the last committee did, and they may not necessarily run to the constitution, and then things just morph into something that's entirely no longer what the constitution is. So definitely go back, make sure you've got a copy. If it is really old, then you should be looking as a club to update it. And if you are updating it, then I would look to the model rules. I didn't actually mention any of that. I didn't even put the model rules in here, but the model rules are put out by your Office of Fair Trading or Consumer Affairs, that group, and they will help you to ensure that your rules fit the legislation. And the most important thing, if you're picking up the model rules, is to actually look at them and say, do they fit how we operate? And we'll have a look at a few of those. I might just reference that as we go through. Changes to constitution do need to be voted on by all the members. They shouldn't deal with governance. They should deal only with governance matters and not operational ones. So you don't want to have to keep going back to your constitution to change something that is a matter of every day when you're operating a club. And the reason you have to get changes okayed by the members is because your constitution is basically a contract that the members have with the club. So that is why it needs to go to meetings to get it changed. So very quickly, in this constitution, you will find your club purpose. It will just detail why you exist and what you're there for. It's always a good idea to jump in and have a look at that and see if you're still who you say you are. And if you are not who you say you are, that's fine. You can then just have a look at it and say, well, we've kind of changed a little bit of who we are. We might need to take that and change it, so the members are, saying, well, that actually does reflect who we are. Or you might like to look at it and say, we've strayed very far from what we were or supposed to be, and maybe we should pull ourselves back the other direction, whichever way it works for you. Membership, you'll find membership information in here. So who is a member? Sometimes that's quite detailed. Sometimes it can be more open. It will often give your committee, or sometimes it will give a committee, the scope to actually take up an opportunity. So if you see an opportunity for membership into the organisation, some constitutions will allow that group to say, that's an opportunity to get more members into our club. I think we'll define that membership category. Some in those membership spaces will more define that you have senior and junior members, but won't break it up into the actual category that those people will take. So, but go and have a look at what your constitution's saying around your membership. Is that actually a membership? If it's not, then have a look at maybe how you best define your membership. And as I say, it might be more broad so that you can break them up and actually give them a category outside of that's more operational, rather than defining them in your constitution in that way. So that sort of, have a bit of a look. That's probably what I would say. If you've got your constitution, go, does that actually suit what we're doing? Does it give us enough scope to take up opportunities to get people to be a part of the organisation? It will also detail how people can join and cease membership. This is an important and interesting area. Joining membership now, often we're doing that in an online space, and often if you go to your constitution, it will not support the process. So even having a look at maybe wording in around that to better reflect what you're doing. Some constitutions will say things like members become members as defined by the committee, and then that process, the actual operational part of becoming a member, is no longer defined in constitutions. And I think when you're looking at constitution, you have to think back to a time when everything was on paper, that people were putting things on bits of paper and sending in checks, and we have moved a very long way from that. So yeah, sometimes that part of your constitution may not quite reflect what you're actually doing, so it might be worthwhile looking at it and cleaning that up. Obviously, I'll tell you how you can terminate membership. So That's in there, and subscriptions or fees might be mentioned as well, in that you will set them. It shouldn't state a fee. So if you've got a fee in there, then I would get rid of that too out of your constitution, put it through a meeting and say that fee is no longer what we're doing. Most constitutions now probably wouldn't state a fee in there, but those subscriptions will be defined as to how it goes about it, and the committee, there'll be different talking about the fact that you're actually going to charge for a membership. It will define general meetings. So general meetings are meetings that all the members are invited to. So annual general meetings and special general meetings. They're different to committee meetings. So that's something to be thinking about. The committee meeting is the group that are elected to be on your committee, and annual general meetings and special general meetings around getting the membership together for a purpose. So it's probably usually annual general meeting has a purpose, we'll talk about in that moment, and special general meetings also have a purpose. They're usually about voting something that the club wants to have voted on before an annual general meeting. The Constitution will detail how you run those meetings, how they're called, notification, timeframes, voting requirements, quorums. So it will tell you everything you need to know about those meetings and how you run them. So when you're running, making sure that you actually understand them and running to the letter of the law that's in them. And again, if your club is not doing what's in your constitution, having a look to say, is that because it's not practical to do what was happening 10 or 15 years ago when we last looked at it because it's well and truly too old? Or is that what we should be doing and we just didn't know, so we haven't been doing it? Good governance means that we go and have a look at those rules and run by it. Annual general meeting, there are requirements around your annual general meeting that you will need to hold it at certain times after your financial year. And it'll be dictated by dictated by two things. It'll be dictated by what's in your constitution and also what potentially is under the law. And I say that because in some states you will find that they've got a certain amount of time. It will probably be somewhere between 3 and 6 months, but your constitution might tell you that you need to have it 1 month after. If your constitution says 1 month after, even though you've got more grace under the law, you need to do it 1 month after the end of your financial year. However, your club might look at it and say, it actually would help us if we didn't have to run it so quickly. So let's look at changing that too, so we can match what the law says and go out 3, 6 months, whatever the actual association's legislation tells you you have to do. So looking at those things can sometimes help you manage a club a bit better. If you wanted to get your books audited, it's really hard to do it in a month. So they're the types of things that might help you to better run the club. Is obviously for presenting financials to the members. That's one of the things that you'll do in an annual general meeting. You elect your new committee there. Appoint an auditor if your club audits its accounts, which you may or may not have to do via the law, and that we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. I say these times can be an opportunity to talk about your club successes. So you might run the annual general meeting, but either side of it, you have a bit of a day where you celebrate the club. So it might happen at a presentation day so that people are there to celebrate the club and the members, and you can get to talk about how well you did during the year and talk back to the members around, the things that you've done. And then you also run the committee, the actual AGM, and obviously wrapping your AGM in with those kinds of social events. Making that AGM quite short means that you might have more people to actually put their hand up to be a part of your committee. Keeping in mind that however you're electing your committee might also be determined in ways in your constitution. But by having people there, a lot of clubs will have the opportunity to nominate a position on the floor or put your hand up for a role on the floor. If that's the case for you, then putting a lot of people in the room gives you more opportunity to ask people or eyeball people or get them to come on board. As I say, special general meetings generally are called because you can't wait for an AGM, or you don't want to wait for an AGM to make a change. It could be around constitutional changes or removal of committee members or the committee. There are special conditions in around special general meetings. They do allow members to actually call. So the members as a group can call a special general meeting if they're unhappy with how the club's being managed. So you can have the group, if they're all in, there is an amount of people that will have to do this that will be specified in your constitution, so that there is an opportunity for the members who are, the club is theirs in all reality, for them to make a call on what goes on if they don't like what's happening. But just be aware that special general meetings will again be dictated as to how they get called, who can call them, and it all happens through your constitution. Thank you, Eloise. That would be cease. Thank you very much. That would be my typing. Sorry. Eloise has just come back and said, I said CESS, which is Scottish for a levy. But that actually what I meant was cease membership, and that would be my bad typing and poor review of my slides. Another one to note down and change. Your club committee, obviously, in this constitution, will talk about your club committee, how it's structured, how many members are on it, how many you can have on it. So you might have to have a certain amount, but you might also be able to put extra people on up to a certain amount, or you may not have a cap. So being aware of what the constitution is telling you about your committee, and it will be dictated in there. What powers the committee has. So it usually has something in there talking about the powers of committee. Powers of committee basically are you're elected to actually run the club. So when the AGM is there, you put your hand up, they say, yes, we want you on there. The committee are the people who are charged with the legal responsibility of that club and for the management of it. It means that good governance would say you go out and you plan and you ask for people's opinion, but ultimately the committee does get to make calls on what goes on at the club. How the club committee meetings are conducted is in there too. So there'll be things around when you send agendas, what you need to do, timeframes, those types of things. So make sure that you are actually having a good look at how you should be running your committee meetings. Removal of committee members is usually in there, and meeting protocols. So often there'll be, depending on what your constitution is, but there'll usually be some little bit of this is how we run the show. And if you don't think that, again, if you think that there's a few things missing in there, pop into the model rules. They're usually quite good in this space. Or if you do have something specific that your club is doing for a reason, then it might be worthwhile saying, well, we're actually going to pop that in because I think it's something that we need to do and maintain in our governance and maintain in the way the committee's running. So having a bit of a look at what's in there is always a good idea. Club committee meetings, again, just on club committee meetings, the meetings of the committee are for the members that are elected at your AGM. So you should be meeting as a group to discuss strategy, really, and to maintain that good governance, which is around fiscal management, strategic planning, risk management, all those real governance-y type things. There should be a group that really keeps their eye on that. And I'm going to flip in after this into a couple of committee structures or club structures that might help to start to say, well, we can actually have a group that really do look at those governance elements and keep us on track in that space. And then we've got people who help us operate. Only committee members should really attend committee meetings. Sometimes we end up with situations where the committee comes, where we get everyone else and everyone comes to a meeting. The decisions that are made, and going back to the point where we were looking at that legal custodianship. Sorry, I've just been, you've thrown me off course, Karen. I'll answer that one in a moment. That only the committee members should be attending, and that's because you're making the decisions that you're going to be responsible for as a committee for making. So if we have lots of people who haven't actually put their hand up to be legally in that space, who are also having a big impact on what you're making, they ultimately, if something does go wrong, they're not going to be the people who get asked the questions. So that's it's probably the worst case scenario explanation that I can give you, but that committee are the ones that have said, yes, I will be legally responsible for the organisation. So therefore I need to meet as a group so that I can actually do that management. So it doesn't mean that we don't listen to the group. It doesn't mean that we don't tell the group what's going on, or we don't invite them to be a part of that process of growing and being a part of the club. But those committee meetings really need to be the committee only. Now, you can invite people to a committee meeting. So if there's someone who wants to come along and you can invite them to come in and have a chat about something or give you some advice or whatever it is, they will not have a vote in that group though. And as I say, it's just around that legal responsibility. You're the people who put your hand up to be legally responsible. So therefore, it is your job to actually run and manage that club. All meetings will need a quorum before you can transact businesses. Again, that will be in your constitution around how you run meetings. It will talk about the quorum. So that will often be based on how many people are on your committee. It will usually be probably usually about 30%, but it will depend on your constitution. So you really need to go and have a little look. Minutes must be kept of the meeting and stored for future committees. Minutes do not need to be sent to club members. So we'll talk about this too, because I know that's usually a mechanism for communicating and having, there's no reason why you can't send those minutes, but you don't have to send the minutes. One of the reasons I would say you shouldn't send the minutes to club members is sometimes you might need to note something in there that shouldn't be common knowledge by everyone. So confidentiality should be maintained. And now I've just popped myself in another note. I probably should have put a little thing about confidentiality. That you might find that you need to actually record something in those minutes. So you do have a record just in case you need it. And quorums, again, I've come back to quorums, that you do need to make sure that you have your quorum. Now, in terms of Karen's question, she said, can we have the slides? Yes, I'm happy to put the slides out there. And I would like to try and put this into a bit of a checklist. I've got a little bit of a checklist so that maybe it's a good way to go through. Again, coming back to the reason we're running this, game plan will also help you do this. So there's lots and lots of resources in game plan, and there's a structured way to sort of tackle these different questions that pop up. So it might help you also to go through and answer their questions and then start to tackle different things that you may not feel are quite as they should be in your club. The executive committee, I've just got Sarah saying, is executive committee a done thing? So executive committee, if it's written in your constitution, you'll have one. If that's what it's written and it gives functions to the executive committee. But generally speaking, no. The executive committee is often what we say president, treasurer, secretary, those executive roles. But in actual fact, if you're elected into a group, and that's why I say it's really important to go back and have a look and say, what do we actually have to do to have our committee in place? If your committee says, if your constitution says you need 9 people on your committee for it to run, you need 9 people on your committee for it to run. If your constitution says you need these roles and you can have up to 9 people, then that's fine. But if you're whatever, so that's fine, you can run with less than 9 people. But if your constitution says you need this many people on your committee, then you need that many people on your committee. Often my advice would be around that. If that's what your constitution is saying, that you might have a bit closer look at what you need to do in that space. So you maybe don't have to have 9 or 15. So depending on what the constitution was, depending on who put it together, depending on how old it is, you might find that you've got an enormous amount of people who need to be on a committee. It is often easier to have a smaller committee, and we will have a bit of a look at what I'm saying around that in the next one. Next couple of slides. It's a little way off, apparently. It's under committee meetings. That's right. I talk about them specifically. But yeah, very important just on that to go back and have a look and say, what should we have? So sometimes you will say that we need these positions and they have to be filled, and then we can have 2 other people, or it will say you have to have 4 other people. So depending on what it is, you can have 2 to 4, will give you a bit more scope on who you take in. But keeping to those limits is really quite important. Your financial year will be detailed in your constitution, really, really important, because it dictates when your AGM is held. So then going back to that other point, that your constitution will also maybe tell you when that AGM needs to be held after your financial year. So making sure that you're aware of what that is supposed to look like. Generally speaking, not even generally speaking, always speaking, your AGM will be held after the end of your financial year, and your financial year may not be the 30th of June. It might be the 31st of March, it might be the 30th of September. So really understanding that is important, and understanding that if you want to change the financial year, that's a change of your constitution, and it needs to go to an AGM, and you also need to lodge it with your Consumer Affairs or Office of Fair Trading, the body that manages the incorporated bodies in your state. So yeah, and I've just got that little point down the bottom. Have a look at your incorporated associations legislation to find out what the timeframes are for AGM. So if you did want to push it out and give yourself every bit of the grace that the legislation is going to let you do, then yeah, go and have a look and see what you can do, and then just push it out so you can hold it whenever you feel it's best. Like Emily, she would love that extra people turn up to the meeting. Emily, we'll actually discuss the executive committee, because what you're probably experiencing is what we might actually have a bit of a look at and what I'm going to suggest around it. Not it's not so much the done thing, it's that constitutionally you can't decide that there's a group that's got more power than the people who put their hand up to legislate, to be the legal custodians of the club. So pretty much you're almost cutting those people out of the conversation. And you might find that there's a reason you're doing that, and we'll talk about that a bit later too. Yeah, so Shari's just said under the zone they do have what they call an executive committee, but if it's in your constitution, then run with it. But we'll talk about too why people tend to want to have a smaller group, because it does make more sense in some ways. Winding up will also be covered. Not that we want you to do this, but there is a process around finishing up an organisation, and the process is then put through your constitution. And that's obviously because when you start up, there's usually a startup process, and obviously you need a wind up one. So if you're no longer operating, what do you do? This will happen if you don't have enough people, or you no longer exist for the purpose in which you were originally created, is another reason it will happen. We won't spend too much time there. We don't want you winding up. Legislation and rules. As incorporated bodies, this is one of the most important pieces of legislation that you'll look at, but there's other ones too that we should look at. This one's the New South Wales Associations Corporations Act of 2009. So back to the point that we had before, and I've lost who gave it to me. If your constitution is older than the legislation, definitely look at upgrading your constitution, having a look at it. When the change happened in Victoria, there was a legislation change in 2012. The changes weren't absolutely blow out of the water, gee, we must be so far off the pulse, except if you had model rules that had not been touched in, say, 25 years. They weren't so significant that you would look at them and go, oh my goodness, we're so out of touch now. But the changes were to neaten things up. So, and in terms of the model rules, when they changed the Incorporations Act in Victoria, the model rules actually became a much better reflection of the legislation. So it followed it a little bit more closely, and therefore it was easier to interpret what the legislation was saying through those model rules. So the model rules are a good place to start. If you actually are looking at doing anything about your rules because you think they're a little bit outdated or they're a lot outdated, then I would start in that place. And there's a few important things to actually look, and we might even look at doing something that's specifically around that. There are things that you do need to look at if you're going to run off model rules, and a lot of those things are in and around who your members are and who your voting members are, and sometimes positions. So sometimes if you do need to actually, if you want to make sure that a position is always in place at your club, then you might need to write those types of things in. But it does really a lovely job across wind-ups and committee rules and all those types of things. The model rules are quite clean in those spaces. And that's not just Victoria. I've had a look at a few model rules across the country now, and they are quite a nice set of rules. So you'll find that I would say have a copy of this available. So you actually, whatever your Associations and Corporations Act is, that you actually have it at your fingertips. So whether it's that you print off a copy and keep it at the club, or that you actually have access somewhere, because it's kind of handy if you do want to check something, that you've got the actual legislation there. However, those acts are always underpinned by the model rules. So they'll cover a lot of the operational aspects of making a club work. If your constitution is silent on any matter, then you would go to the model rules or to the legislation, whichever one gave you the the best description of what you should be doing. Again, if you've got very old rules, then you're probably going to find that there's a few things that aren't maybe as they should be, and so you would need to go back through those. So that's the reason you would update them. Again, with people who are saying that they've got the that executive management committee, you need to go back to your actual rules. And if you don't have an executive management group, it will say it in there that you have one, and then you have a general committee. If you just have a management committee, and that's what it's saying, you just have a management committee, and however many people are on that or required to be on it is what you're supposed to do. So if your constitution says you only need 3 people and you can have another 2, then you only need 3 people and you can have another 2. If it says you need these 3 people, so you must fill these positions and you must have 2 other people, then that is your committee. That's what your committee is made up of. If it's silent and you put lots of people on your committee at an AGM, then that is now your committee. So if you ended up putting 15 people on your committee and your constitution didn't say you couldn't have 15 people, and you gave them a position and you elected them at your committee, at your AGM, then they're your committee. So that's why I say there's power, and good governance comes out of this, knowing what your committee is, knowing what you want your committee to do, and ensuring that your committee is going to do the operations that you want it to do. It is going to operate the way you want it to do. That's Shari's just popped in there that there's a tool on the Justice Connect to assist building customised rules in Victoria. So if you are a Victorian club, jump in there and have a look. So this is just another, ATT have Associations and Corporations Act, and this is 1991. That's the Victorian Incorporations Reform Act of 2012. So every state has its own version of its incorporation rules. You will find that if you look at them, they're often somewhat similar. They obviously will have slightly different things in them, but they will they touch on the same issues. But definitely go to your one, because that's the one that's relevant to your club if you're in that state. Other legislation, have a bit of a think about. Even though we're volunteers, and even though we're running not-for-profit clubs and we're overwhelmed, it still doesn't say we don't have to run by the laws. So knowing what laws are going to impact us is important. I've just listed off a few in here. So, we've got child safeguarding laws and contract law, discrimination laws. They're all things that we need to be somewhat aware of. Now, as clubs, sometimes we find our state national bodies to be annoying, but a lot of what we put in place are to try and help ensure that these laws and rules are followed at club level. So sometimes when something comes out and you're like, oh goodness, there's something else I've got to do, you potentially do need to do it, but it will be in and around one of these laws. It'll be something that we're trying to address in around some of these laws, so that you as a club don't have to go and read all the laws and know whatever the rules or the policies or whatever else the organization's putting in place. They're usually just to help you achieve remaining in a lawful state. So one of the big ones at the moment is child safeguarding. A lot of the things we're doing in that is just to ensure that we're actually running under the laws that have been put in place around child safeguarding. The one I've put on the bottom here is local government bylaws. There was a club that I heard of a little while back, and their president went and did something that was against a local government bylaw. Now, that individual didn't go to the committee to get it motioned that they would go and do this activity, just went of their own accord and did it. Now, when I was talking before about acting outside of the committee space, that's a dangerous thing, because realistically speaking, that individual isn't acting for the committee, because there was no minute in the minutes. There was no motion to say that's what he should be doing. So the committee haven't said, yes, we want you to go and do that on behalf of the club. That individual has done it on behalf of themselves. So they got fined. The club got fined for that action. Now, in all reality, the club could say to that individual, that's not our fine, because we don't have anything to support that we wanted you to go and do that. You just did it yourself. So in all reality, the fine should actually go to that individual, because they actually did the action. Does that make sense? That's it's probably the most workable example I can think of around knowing what rules and laws are, not breaking them, but also acting within the bounds of your committee. So there's plenty of these. I'm actually trying to create a bit of a page where we'll stick a lot of this stuff as well. So just so that these are there and maybe linking as much as possible back. It is quite tricky because some of these laws won't be federal, so it won't apply to everyone. These will be, some of them will be more local or statewide laws, but as we go on, we'll try and find that so that makes it a bit easier if you want to go and have a look, or you need to go and have a look at any point in time. Club rules, I just pop this in because this is the more operational space that we exist in. So there's, at one point, a lot of things would often land in the Constitution, which would be more operational processes. And then clubs found that they needed to go and change, when they needed to change that operational process, they go back to their group and get them to vote on it. And then, of course, they need to change it again. So there's a fairly big emphasis on leaving your constitution being around the who gets on a committee, when you run things, notifications, how you put your hand up to do things on terms of being on the committee or taking up various roles. Those types of things that you need to hardwire into how you're actually going to govern your organisation go into constitution. But other operational rules that are around setting behaviour or giving details about how you actually operate, they can go into club bylaws. They may not even go into a big set of bylaws. They might just come into different rules. You might just have a, this is game day rules. So when you rock up on rally day, these are all the bits and pieces you need to do, and we put them up in spots where we can start to say this is the behaviours that we want. So they can't contradict the Constitution, and they're not there to manage governance matters. So we don't start writing in anything around how we get a secretary into a role, because that should be in your Constitution. Absolutely, Megan. One of the functions of being on the committee, and I think we'll talk a little bit deeper now that we're getting these conversations in here. Absolutely, the committee can create subcommittees. In most constitutions, you will actually read there that they've got the powers of committee are that they can create subcommittees or charge or delegate authority to other people to do certain operational functions. And absolutely. And we'll actually have a bit of a closer look. I'm just going to touch on policy and procedure. Policy and procedure is quite important in creating culture. These are instruments to set expected standards of behaviour. So that's that whole cultural thing that we're looking for. Often policies are around behaviour and procedures around what we do when we don't see the behaviour or how we go about managing certain tasks. It ensures a consistent response. So as a group, we can start to define this is how we do things. And then if it's not working, we can then change up what we do, but we change it and everyone will then know. Record of actions for future committees. So you actually know, you're starting, if you're documenting these things, the next committee has an idea of what used to happen, and they can go about doing what you do or starting to look at whether that process actually works. I've popped up the child safeguarding one. We don't actually get to change that policy. So even if it wasn't working, that's the next level up because that's through the National Integrity Framework. But just as an example, that is a policy. That's another one, code of conduct. This is around behaviours. It's setting behaviours. And the conduct and disciplinary policy, which is a policy that helps to manage conflict and complaints. That's setting in part a process so that we can actually follow a process to achieve an outcome, and it happens the same way all the time. So that's what they're sort of trying to do. And of course, I've just popped in the rule book. So another thing that we do is create rules so that people know what they should be doing, and we know what to do if they don't do it. So they're all just about that, setting expectations, and that's all about good governance. And you'll have different things in your clubs that sort of, you're either going to run under a more national space in your club for these things and let someone else worry about writing them, or you're going to have various things. You might have a policy on leaving tacking gear in the clubhouse. There might be a policy that you actually write to say, well, that's what we need, or you have a policy around agistment if you've got agistment, so that people know what the expectation is, and then you can hold them accountable to it. And there's an acknowledgement of what's going to happen if those behaviours aren't adhered to. And so people up front already know what's going to happen. The committee. So we're getting in to the committee. I've got 10 minutes. Good grief. The role of the committee is in and around what we've been talking about. So making sure that we run legally and constitutionally, understanding the influence your club can have on the culture, planning, making sure that you don't trade insolvent, ensuring that everyone's being looked after. So whether it's sporting, competitive, social needs of everyone. So we're actually looking at what we can do for everyone in the club. Addressing and monitoring risks, so many things you're doing, recruiting and empowering people to come on board, ensuring the sustainability of the club, communicating regularly with committee members, maintaining and handing over club information, so that induction and training space, and making sure that you understand you are the legal custodians of that club and acting in the best interests of the members and the club at all times. So coming back to Megan's point around the subcommittees, so your committee is this group of people who are trying to do a job, and sometimes that we went right back to leadership and what leadership is and isn't. Leadership is that we're not doing all the work on club committee, and generally speaking, that is what happens. And Megan's point of, can we appoint a subcommittee? Yes, generally speaking, if you go to Constitution, you'll have the capacity to put together subcommittees or to give people responsibility to do things. So you will ultimately be responsible as the club committee, but you can get other people doing operational tasks for you and reporting back to you in some way, shape or form, which would be the good governance part of it, that we actually report back to the committee in some way, shape or form. And that's usually something that you've already predetermined. So I've just given you an example. You could have subcommittees for all sorts of things. There's your major event subcommittee. So you can put groups of people into these if you have groups of people. Now, sometimes when I have this conversation, you are from a club and there's like 20 people in it and half of them are under 12. You're not going to have an enormous amount of people there to do jobs. So the other opportunity, before I go into that, so if on this structure, you would have things like committee charters. That's a good governance tool to actually help give that committee the idea and knowledge of who they are. So, and that's another terms of reference. These are both club committee ones, but you could make one for your subcommittee to tell them what their purpose is, tell them who they report to, and tell them what their power is. And then anything else, the quorums, those types of things can also be included in terms of reference. Club structures, this might also be it. You might have 5 or 7 people on a club committee. So going to that point where we have executive committees and we're trying to make it a little bit smaller because it's easier to make fundamental decisions with less people. That's sometimes what happens. So I would say 5 to 7, depending. I know in Queensland, you only technically need 3 people on your committee. That's mandated under your legislation. So you can make that little committee a smaller, tighter group, and because that committee is really just going to be looking after those fundamental governance processes in your club. So they're going to make sure that you have a strategy. They're going to make sure that you're financially sound. They're going to make sure that risks are mitigated. And then you can have people doing some of the operational jobs. So some of those people on club committee might also be the chief instructor, but their chief instructor role is something that happens in this space. Their club committee role would be that I'm looking after the strategic direction. So, and I would be feeding information back to the club committee based on what we decided we're going to do. So there are a few options. So sometimes in previous times, we would probably end up with a committee of 15. And when you have a committee of 15, what happens is that people go there, don't say a thing for 2.5 hours while we talk about everything and anything. And those people eventually go, I really just can't give up 2.5 hours of my time to say nothing. And so they don't come back. So as much as possible, we're being able to define what those jobs are and to give people operational jobs where they have an amount of authority to go and do a job will help your committee operate in a smoother way. In many ways, you'll probably get more done. To help this in good governance, we would have role descriptions that help support that person in their role so they know what they can and can't do, and when they need to come back to the committee to get the okay to go forward. And so that okay would often be around spending money, or just that they want to go on an entirely different tangent that may be against what the strategic objectives of the organisation are, or something entirely different. You might say, we want to come back. You need to come back if it's going to be something that's out there, left of centre. But these job descriptions just help let people know what's going on, but also help to recruit people, because then you can say, hey, this is actually the job. and this is what we think it will take you in time. That's a really big one, the club president one. But you can make them look as inoffensive as you like. Committee meetings. Again, I will send these ones out with all the bits and pieces. This is kind of going back over what we've already said. Run them in accordance with your constitution. Make sure that the people who are elected at the AGM are the ones that are in that meeting and are told about what's going on. We are building those, Carly. Carly's just asked whether we've got a set of role descriptions or PC focus. We are building those in game plan. There's a truckload of them. But yes, we will actually be trying to build some that are more specific or feel like us. If I'll put the call out there, if you already have role descriptions and you want to send me your role descriptions, that would help me enormously. But yeah, I do. And we'll put I'm actually creating a governance page on the PCA website it's under Club Source, and we'll just have as much of this information put in there. So if you want to cherry pick bits and pieces that'll help your club, then you will be more than able to. And as I say, in game plan, there's a truckload of resources in that space. Again, just going back over, you can invite people to have a chat, but if people are coming in who aren't elected, they don't get a vote. If you've got appointed people on your committee, generally speaking, they won't get a vote either. So make sure you check your constitution for their position. And the reason that is because if someone is appointed, they don't necessarily, you're picking them, the members aren't picking them. So that's generally it. But having said that, appointed roles may have a vote as well, but that will be defined in constitution. To run good committee meetings, we are looking at things like setting good agendas, making motions to actually make decisions, so it's very clear that we're making a decision. Apologies and attendances are recorded, so you've got that prosperity, you know who was at them, and you can also prove that you had quorum when you're making your business decisions. And apologies should be made by committee members every time they can't attend a meeting. So when you send it out, it's like an RSVP. Come back and say, so if you can't be at the meeting, make a point of saying, I'm an apology. So agendas are really important tool to make sure you get good meetings. They can create productive and short meetings. Sending out information that you're going to talk about, potentially even with a motion on the book, helps you to start thinking about it before you get to that space. So you can read it and go, oh yes, I understand what's going to happen. I agree with that motion. I don't agree with that motion. I would rewrite this motion this way. So you've already thought about it. So you can come to the meeting with those thoughts. Should support the strategic plan. So if you've got a strategic plan in place, this agenda should really be looking at the strategic plan and focusing on what you're actually trying to achieve. Include reports from subcommittees or roles from the club. So if you actually went through that process of saying, well, we're going to have a smaller committee, but we're going to have some committees doing various jobs, or we're going to have people doing various jobs, put in place a mechanism for them to say, we're having these meetings once a month, and this is the date. And if you could give us a slight report on what's going on, it doesn't have to be massive. It just needs to be an update and any recommendations you might have for the committee. So if we need to actually say, yes, you can go and do something, then make it at that point in time. Good financials really needs to be in a spot on your agenda to talk about finances, but making sure that those financials are good so you're making sound decisions. And you might even allocate time on this agenda. You've got like how much time you're going to allocate to each meeting. So you might say that the confirmation is 1 minute. It's a pretty quick thing. Actions from the previous meeting, we're going to spend 30 minutes talking about the things that are in there. So obviously this is a very slim one. You'd have your actual actions in there, but you might say we're going to spend 15 minutes talking about this and that is it. And so by the time you get to 15 minutes, you go, are we making any decision? No. Okay, we'll just say that we've discussed it and we'll come back to a next meeting. Or as I say, potentially you're actually coming in with the motions that you want to make at that meeting. And so therefore you go through the process of just talking about the motions. You might say, well, it's 15 minutes, that's all we've got, or everyone gets 2 minutes to talk about it, and then we're making the decision and going forward. So minutes, of course, are the legal record of your meeting. So it's really important that you do keep them, for future generations of your committee, that you do actually record motions in that they're carried or defeated, that you don't need to circulate them to your club members. And you don't need to record everything that was said in the meeting. The most important parts are around recording that motion, or really recording something that you think will be useful for an understanding of why that decision was made. That might be the other part. So they don't have to be massive, long pieces of information. They just need to record the important parts. Some you may or may not need to sign them, depends on the incorporated associations legislation. Most of them, you don't need to sign your minutes. That's something that I've heard recently around the traps. You may have to sign the part that says that the previous minutes were confirmed as being an accurate and true record, and that might be the president who needs to sign it. And I know that is the case in Queensland. But make sure they're kept and passed on. Planning. I'm just having a bit of a look. 8 o'clock. I'm going to hold you here for a bit longer. I hope it's getting a few wheels turning and you're actually finding it quite interesting. Planning is a really important part of being a good committee and of good governance. It actually underpins everything else that you're doing, because without a plan, that little saying, fail to plan to fail, is true. Planning allows you to know where you're going, and allows you to know whether you achieved it. So sometimes when we don't ever stop to think about what the plan is, we actually don't know that we've succeeded. So sometimes it can feel like we actually haven't succeeded, but we probably have been quite successful. We just can't measure it against anything. We don't have anything that says that that's exactly what we're trying to do. And so you might end up in a situation where you can see a massive amount of things that you need to do, and therefore you don't feel like you've gone anywhere because you haven't got rid of all those jobs that you're wanting to do. So it can help give you a sense of achievement. It will reduce conflict, increase teamwork, and planning empowers your volunteers, because you can start to put those jobs out and say, we need you to go and get that for us. So that person can go and actually do that job. It will, Jackie. It will be out there, and I'm happy to give the slides to you. So if you're finding the slides useful or interesting, I will send the slides as well or put them up somewhere. Because I don't know whether they'll be too big, but we'll work out that one, whether it's even, I'll work out how we can get those slides out, and even if it comes out into some more of a checklist style thing, so you can just tick things off. Types of planning, so that's another thing, and we will go on to talk about this in future webinars. So obviously strategic planning, but risk management, marketing comms plans, development strategies or plans, so how you plan on developing different people, facility development plans, fundraising strategy plans, succession planning. There's all types of planning that can be done, and it all is reflecting great governance. And please don't be overwhelmed by any of that. It's just all suggestions for something to sit in your mind. And as I say, we will actually have a bit of a look at a few of these that might help in your club. Just raising succession planning, because it is a really good thing to do as a committee and to be aware of. How are we going to get someone in to continue the great work we did? Part of that's knowing what your jobs are, understanding the skills of the jobs that are happening, knowing when the role is likely to become vacant. So you can actually have a little succession planning sort of record, so you know what the positions are, you know who's been there, you know when they started, and you might be asking the question, where are you at? Are you thinking you've got another 2 years in you? And then you know that person's going, look, I really don't want to do this for more than 2 years. So you know that you're in a position where you need to start finding someone. Having understudies, having people that are actually working sort of alongside that person helps to naturally have someone be able to step into a role. Ensuring that you get individuals trained and skilled in roles that do need it. So good example, I'm in little athletics, getting people to start, there is actually a bit of training to do the starting position where they shoot the gun. Being able to continually get people into that space and get them qualified is quite an important thing for that organisation to do, so that they don't fall short of people to start races. So there'll be jobs in Pony Club that definitely fit this area. So having a good think about what and who you might be putting into those training sessions and getting them excited about doing a bit of training. And you guys have proved that training is okay, because you rocked up tonight and there were plenty of you. Finance, very important part of the committee. In fact, it's probably one of the most important things that you will do on committee. And that's to ensure that your organisation is financial and that you have a bit of structure around what happens in this space. Obviously, there's a few other things in finance that your constitution and good governance will say, which is presenting those finances to the AGM, knowing whether you should be audited. Most clubs are probably a tier 1 and potentially don't need to be audited, but knowing that whether you should be getting audited or not is important. Any other legal requirements that you understand that maybe you do need to do them, or you're happy that you don't need to do them, but making sure that you're in that space, so BAS statements or ABNs. So if you're in that space, most clubs won't be. But even looking at the potential opportunities that exist in those spaces for your organisation as well. I'm suggesting that in this, you should be looking at who is a signatory, who your signatories are every year. So at the end, after your AGM, you've got people in, maybe even noting that we know who the signatories are. And obviously if you make changes, that happens as well, because that's a good record for people going forward. You know who was or who is, and if things happen to go poorly at some point, they know potentially who's going to be on the accounts for signing. Working with budgets, using things like cash flows or variance reports makes the finances a little bit easier for the committee to really understand, so you can make good financial decisions. And putting in place good financial policy and procedure is a good thing for committees to do, and is in that definition of good governance. Recording and reporting. I am mentioning here Just Go, and this is where Shari jumped in very early up. Just Go does have a place to put those important documents. So things like your AGM minutes, your constitution, things that you think you'd really love to ensure that an ex-committee has access to. There is a document space in Just Go. I'm going to get Shari to actually write down how you use it, because I've been meaning to go and have a play and I haven't managed it yet. But we'll put something out around that, because I have asked Model to do it, because I have said to a few different clubs, this might be a good spot to put some of those things that go awry or go astray. Record keeping of members, really, really important. We are a member-based organisation, so making sure that we know who our members are, it's really, really important. And we often think about members being writing members, but make sure that we are also recording those supporting members, because volunteerism is a really important thing that happens in not-for-profits. And we don't think of volunteers often, or those people doing official jobs, as necessarily members of the organisation, but they are in all reality. They're people who are actively involved in making Planet Club happen. And even being able to say to these people who are volunteering, that's your participation. That's your ability to be a part of this organisation. And so wrapping your arms around them and making them a part of who we are is not a bad thing. We also have a record of who has been involved with the organisation at various stages, but also that you at that point in time have an easy way to communicate to those members, so you know who they are. And if you want to separate and communicate differently, we're going to look at communication in the next couple of webinars. So having a bit of a think about that is not so bad. You obviously get to know whether you're growing or shrinking as an organisation, and it's going to give the committee a good knowledge of who and what has happened over the journey as well. Keeping your committees, I didn't actually write that. There is an opportunity to put teams into Just Go, and putting a team in that's your committee each year is a good record keeping thing for your future committees, as well as it does. I think you can actually pop it in and send emails to your team. So that might be a good way of using the Just Go membership database to help you do the functions of the committee. Gives you data for planning. I'm a big data person, so it does help you understand what's going on. Keeps compliance going. So things like working with children's checks are good to have in that space, because you know that you've ticked that box and said we are complying. So just trying to keep that space a bit tidy and using that membership record space for your good governance and for the way you're keeping your information. And so that's the opportunity to store documents for future committees. So anything that's really important that you think future committees might like to lay their hands on, it might be a good thing to think about putting it into that space. Keeping key contacts. I kept this because this was something that I found, and I thought it was really interesting, because it's probably something we don't think about, and we don't necessarily have a mechanism always to keep this information. So making sure that we do keep it and put it like in a centralized file storage space. Maybe all the present committees not so hard, we can put them into the database. But if we've got local government contacts or state, territory people, federal people, people that we know we can talk to, then maybe sometimes keeping those contacts is not a bad thing. Because if we want to reach out to someone, or we want to send them things about us, newsletters, those types of things, keep them in the loop, which we'll talk about in the future webinars. Really handy to have it there. Obviously your team, your club coaches, team managers, officials, and your workforce, people that you want to be able to talk to, it's a good thing. And probably the Just Go database is giving you that opportunity. So you've got a good spot that you can just keep popping in and sending information. Media contacts. So we often would like to get ourselves in media. We want people to cover what we do. So knowing or getting someone to go around and find out who those people are is a good thing to do, and then keeping them is good. Obviously, as sports associations, so national state bodies, just so that if you need to call them, you can, and people know how to contact them. Supplier details, definitely supplier details. If you have change of committee and you know that a supplier has been looking after you for a long time, it might be a good thing that they can tap into that resource. Sponsors, contacts, obviously people who are going to give you money, it's always a good idea to keep them on tap. Annual reports, we're talking about recording and reporting. Annual reports, a lot of clubs don't necessarily do. You can pop in and say, yes, we do. I do that. If you do, I encourage clubs to have a bit of a look at doing this. It doesn't have to be a shiny thing. It can just be a little bit of a record of what your club did from year to year, because this becomes really important for previous committees to actually have a look at what's going on, and they get an idea or a feel for what was happening. They can inspire them. So if you had 10 years worth of reports and you go back and you say, gee, that looked fantastic, and we're not doing it anymore because the committee came through and they didn't value it, maybe they resurrect what was happening 10 years ago. It gives confidence in your club's governance as well, that you're actually reporting each year on what you've been doing. Generally speaking, you can report a measure of success, so your strategic planning area, so the things that you've planned to do, that's probably what you would pop in here to say, this is how well we did in this year. And yes, as I say, valuable resource for future committees. Media reports or newsletters. So when I'm saying things like I wouldn't send my minutes, partly because minutes shouldn't be a newsletter as such. They should probably just record the motion, so they should be quite boring. Instead of sending the minutes, I say send newsletters. So this one's the first one. I picked this up, South Midlands Pony Club. It's their very first edition of their South Midlands Pony Club newsletter. This is where you guys get to actually do that process of social influence, communicate and get people excited about what the club's doing. You can celebrate your members. It's a much more, you can put pictures in it. It's a lot better mechanism for reporting back what's going on. So you might have a little spot that says meeting reports and just maybe what you've actually discussed at the meeting, but you would flesh that out in better reports around why you're making those decisions, or what's the pressing issue. You might be able to use this as an opportunity to say, hey, the committee's sort of been thinking about this. What's your opinion? Give us some feedback. So the newsletter, I think, is a better way, or a meeting report. So you might actually have a meeting report that says we've discussed these issues and these are where we're going, rather than the actual minutes themselves, where you might want to record something that you need to keep in your minutes that you know is not appropriate for everyone to know about. So yeah, in many ways, just celebrating the club in those spaces and getting people excited about what goes on at the club, and really celebrating your members is a great thing to do. I will actually do, Kylie, a little, Kylie's just asked, do I have a sample annual report? I will try and put a little framework again for that governance area. So if you're wanting to pick something up and be a bit inspired, because that's often the hardest thing if you don't quite know where to leap from, that yeah, give you an example so you can go, that doesn't relate to us, but that would be good and this would be good, because it is a lovely thing to be able to do. And actually, I always found that when you did the annual report, you could reflect on what you had done during the year, and it made you go, oh wow, we actually did achieve a lot this year, and I didn't know how much we'd achieved. So as I say, if you're working off a strategic plan, it'll be easier to get that feeling. But if you're not quite planning that way, but you can reflect on what the club has done and where the committee has gone that year, it is a nice spot to stop and really celebrate you. Communication. This is from that leadership quote, process of social influence is around communicating. And we do have a webinar in a couple of weeks around marketing communications, where we'll talk about different elements of marketing communication. Communication methods, obviously there's plenty of them, and you guys, part of good governance is looking at these types of things, how we communicate, what methods we're using, who we're using them for, and how we may even ramp it up and get more communication going in around our clubs. So again, if we're depending on the committee to do all of this, only parts of it will happen, because there's only so many volunteer hours you can commit to a club. However, if we tap into our external group and we ask them to do a job for us, we give them good parameters, you might find that some of these things start to happen because we've got more people working for us, but not spending the same amount of time maybe that you're spending, but they're spending a couple of hours every week doing something for us. Training and induction. really, really important for good governance and for having people be skilled and knowledgeable. So again, thank you so much for coming tonight, because that's exactly what you're doing. We've come and we've had a bit of a look at governance. It's a very big area and we've touched on lots and lots of things. But coming and having a bit of a think, because sometimes what will happen out of this, your mind starts ticking over. I would hope it starts ticking over about the things that you are doing or not doing in your clubs, or didn't even think to do. The induction part of that, making sure that all the policies and procedures are documented, means that we've got something to pass on. So that's that, being able to actually give somebody something to come into a role with and understand what you've been doing. Makes the handover really easy, but it also means that we just have that retained knowledge in the club through that documentation. Ensuring that your club committee and officials take every opportunity to train. So when there's stuff out there, then encourage people to go and do stuff, because the more knowledge they have, the better they will be. And it does tend to make you think. Even me, I go to different things. It's amazing what you go to, and suddenly your mind starts working in different directions. So I think sometimes just getting some information back is always a good idea. Creating induction packs for your club. So your committee, when they come on, there's certain documents that we've gone through tonight, and as I say, we'll give you a checklist of things that you maybe should be looking for that maybe are good to put into a pack. And so whether that's online, it might be online now, or if it's a physical thing that you do, and giving something to them to say, these are all the really important things that you should be aware of, is a good thing to be able to do. And just inducting your members to the expectations of the club, actually spending some time talking about this. So when we're talking induction, we're talking about the people in the committee, but we're also talking about the wider community. So actually saying this is what the expectation is when we're a part of this club, because we're a group together that are trying to achieve aims and objectives, and you're an important part of that. So we're finally at takeaways. Just that the committee are leaders of the club. Planning is essential, because that gives you that clear direction, and you can actually measure yourself against what you were hoping to do. The culture is directed by the committee, that you're the leaders, so you can actually shape your culture. So if you don't like what's going on, you can start to move that culture a little bit by through your strong leadership, but also through a method of actually changing it. So that'll be documenting things and communicating that that's what you want. Policy and procedure help to set expectations. So when you get these policies, so whether it comes down from national or state, or you're setting it yourself, just remember that it's just about setting the expectation and giving you a mechanism if we're not reaching it, to try and get those behaviours in place, or whatever it is that policy is trying to set out the expectations for. Communication is key for great leadership, so making sure that people know what's going on. Report and record for future committees. So always be thinking when you're sitting there, what can I write down? What can I keep? What can I make sure that the next committee is going to know, so that they're more informed by your experience and they can do the same for the next group. Succession planning is vital for successful clubs, so that you can iron out that wave. So when one great committee comes in, they do stuff, but then it slides away because the next group don't quite know what they're doing. Being able to flatten that out a bit so you don't have those peaks and troughs. Induction and training help to maintain growth and stability, so that your club is stronger when people are better informed about what they should and shouldn't be doing. Reading and knowing your club constitution is essential. So one of the big messages out of today, if you don't know what your constitution is, go and find it. If you're not entirely sure or confident that it is, go and see the body that's organising the association, incorporated associations, because they'll have a record in some way, shape or form. So just make sure that that is actually your rules that you're running off, and knowing and reading it and referring to it is essential for great governance. Again, this is the game plan portal. I'll send you the link if you want to jump in and have a bit of a look. I am encouraging you to pop into the governance space if you do get in there, and just try and push around that one to make sure that you understand where you're at as a club in here, and maybe build your capacity. We are doing these over the next 6 months. So the club development program webinars will continue, and hopefully it won't be as long as this one. Thank you so much for your patience. Next one will be strategic planning. We'll actually go through a bit of a process that if you want to start strategically planning, that you might be able to put a process in at your club. So giving you the framework under how to do that. And that will be Tuesday, 27th of June, 7 till 8. There it is. You'll find that on Facebook. I'll send a communication like I did for this one, a reminder, and and the actual one with the link. And there'll be a couple of Facebook posts around it as well. So, and we'll try and actually get these up on the web somewhere as well. So you'll be able to go and pop in there if you haven't quite signed up. If you've got any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them, obviously, through the chat. Thank you so much for your patience and listening for so long. It's been great having you. I hope there was something in there that you actually can take away. And if you do have any questions, I'm happy for you to, as they call me, or email me. And in between that, with the slides, I'll have a look at what's practical to send to you. The recording will go out, and I'll send it directly to you to this email, as well as to club administrators in general, and we'll pop that up on the YouTube, our Pony Club Australia YouTube as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. I hope it was enjoyable and interesting. You've given me some great ideas to add to it, but I might have to push it back in some other areas. Thank you so much. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Tanya. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks. I'll just turn this recording off. Thank you also to anyone who's actually made it to this end of the recording. It's great to have you here.